Well, thank you, everybody for coming. Thank you, especially Dr. Morriston and everybody who might be listening online or listening later via the YouTube or podcast. Really appreciate you being here for Dr. Morriston's Q&A on his paper, Endless and Infinite, written with Alex Malpass. In that paper, he debunks or responds to objections that Dr. Craig gives against the possibility of an infinite past. If you do enjoy events like this, you can see the events tab on the left panel. At the top, we've got 3 more events scheduled and another one which will be scheduled soon in August. So certainly do check those out if you're interested. But Dr. Morrison, thank you so much for coming on. If you could just tell us a little bit about yourself, your interest in philosophy of religion, and then perhaps some of the high points of the paper before we turn over to Q&A.
I'm a retired professor at the University of Colorado in Boulder. I've been picking away at various topics in philosophy of religion for a lot of years, more than I like to think. And recently, Alex Malpass and I put together this paper called Endless and Infinite. Would you like me to talk about that just a little bit?
Yes, please. Yeah, if you could just kind of summarize a couple of the main points, and we'll go from there.
Well, our thesis in the paper is that an endless series of events is an actual infinite. It's important to be clear what we mean by that expression, actual infinite. Think of it as a collection of items whose cardinality is the same as the cardinality of some of its proper parts. Okay? So the collection of natural numbers would be actually infinite in that sense, because the cardinality of the natural numbers is the same as that of the even numbers, or that of the odd numbers, or that of the numbers greater than 4, or whatever. Okay. Our old friend Hilbert's Hotel would be an example of an actual infinite in that sense. If the series of past events, I'm thinking of, a series of events stretching, into the past, where the past has no beginning. If the series of past events had no beginning, then it would be an actual infinite in this sense. So what is our thesis? Our thesis is that an endless series of events, each of which will occur, that's an important qualification, would be an actual infinite in this same sense. So that is, the cardinality of the whole series would be the same as the cardinality of some of its proper parts. So by way of illustration, imagine an angel, call him Gabriel, say, who will do 1 praise per minute forever, right? He will do a praise tomorrow. He will do a praise the day after tomorrow. He will do a praise the day after that, and so on forever. So each praise in the series is one that Gabriel will do, okay? It's pretty clear to us that the number of Gabriel's future praises is countable infinity. Each praise in the series will occur. Each will be followed by another. So for each natural number n, the nth praise in the series will occur. So if you ask how many is that, the answer has to be the same as the number of natural numbers. Now, the big question, first question, is whether we haven't somehow confused this with a potential infinite. So I need, for purposes of discussion, I really need to say something about what a potential infinite is supposed to be. And here I'm going to be joining William Lane Craig in just assuming, in describing the potential infinite, that temporal becoming is real and objective. In other words, in accepting an A theory of time. So here's what a potential infinite is supposed to be on this understanding. It's a collection that's always finite, but is continually growing toward infinity as a limit. Always finite, but continually growing toward infinity as a limit. Okay? So here's what I want to say about that. The endless series of praises, each of which will occur, that series is not finite and it's not growing. Something is growing, but that's not it. What is growing is, how to put it, is the series of praises that have been said. So after the first praise is said, one will have been said. After the second has been said, two will have been said. So the series of praises that have been said is always finite and growing toward infinity as a limit. But the series of praises, each of which will be said, is not potentially infinite in that sense. I thought a mental picture might help to understand this. Think of the endless series of praises as a broken line. And for purposes of this illustration, suppose that all the dashes in the broken line are green. Okay? Think of it as a broken line stretching off endlessly into the future. And think of the passage of time this way. As time passes, more and more of the dashes in the broken line change color from green to red, say. The series of red dashes in that broken line is always finite while increasing toward infinity. So the series of red dashes is potentially infinite, but the number of green dashes is always the same, countably infinite. And for that matter, the number of dashes in the line as a whole is always the same, countably infinite. Now, you might be tempted by the following objection. A series of future events can't be an actual event because future events haven't actually occurred yet. So they're still in the realm of potentiality. We just have to go back to the definition of an actual infinite. What I said that an actual infinite was, a collection such that the cardinality of the collection is the same as that of some of its proper parts. Now you can add something to your definition of an actual infinite if you like, but that's not going to turn it into a potential infinite in the sense that I just defined for potential infinite. One more objection is worth thinking about. Craig sometimes says that only this is his position. He's a presentist. He thinks that only present things and events exist. So the future doesn't exist and the past doesn't exist. And thinking about it that way, he sometimes says that the number of future events has to be zero. That seems to me to be quite mistaken. What matters is not whether the events have happened. What matters is whether they can be enumerated. Suppose that Gabriel, to return to that example just briefly, suppose that Gabriel will say one praise a minute from now, another a minute after that, and yet another a minute after that after that, he will be quiet forever. He will never say another praise. Surely the number of praises, each of which will be said by Gabriel, is 3, not 0. Well, go back to the example where the series is endless and each of the praises will be followed by another which will occur. Well, then I say it's a countable infinite. That's the core of our argument. So maybe I'll just stop there.
Okay, and real quick, you made mention earlier of Hilbert's Hotel. If you wouldn't mind, if you could just explain to us what is the Hilbert's Hotel and why is it problematic?
Oh, sure. Hilbert's Hotel is this, it's an infinite hotel. It has infinitely many rooms. And for purposes of illustration, they're numbered, there's one room for each natural number. Each room has a number, a different natural number. the hotel is full in the sense, and each room accommodates exactly one guest. The hotel is full. Um, the the guests, occupy the hotel, one guest per room. And we make room for new guests without kicking anyone out or making anybody double up. Well, yeah, we can just have every guest move to his own room number, to the room number with that number plus one. And room number one is open for a new guest. Can we make room for infinitely many guests? Well, sure. We can just have everybody move to the room with double his present number. And what happens? All the odd numbered rooms are now open for new guests. How many odd numbered rooms are there? Infinitely many. Um, this is often used to try to show that an actual infinite is absolutely impossible. That's what a Hilbert's hotel is.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. And if you're in the audience and you want to ask a question, you can hit the little hand icon that has a piece of paper on it. That'll put you in the queue, and then I'll be able to invite you up, and you'll be able to interact with Dr. Morriston. So I've got a question for Zach. I'm going to send you the invite, and then you'll have a flashing button to click at the top, which will to accept the invite. Then that'll bring you on up. Hey Zach, how are you doing?
Oh, can everybody hear me?
Yep, I hear you great.
I can hear you.
What's on your mind?
Dr. Morrison, thank you for coming on and talking to us. This is really a great opportunity for us. I have a question about Hilbert's Hotel, actually. In the paper, you talk about it as, this attempt to be a symmetry breaker between the infinite past and the infinite future, because I think the idea was that if there had been an infinite past, then at each moment, God could have created one additional room to a hotel, and then presently there would be a Hilbert's Hotel, and then you get all the paradoxical results of an actual infinite in the present moment. Whereas if there's an infinite future, we don't have that problem. So that's the attempted symmetry breaker. One thing that I was wondering is why we can't just specify, let's say, that at one particular moment, God creates a hotel according to a function where one room is created. Again, this is all synchronic. This is all happening at once. One room is created for each of the future praises that Gabriel will sing. Right? And so if there is an infinite future, an endless future ahead of us, then it seems to me that according to this function that doesn't seem impossible to me for an omnipotent being to follow, and an actually infinite Hilbert's Hotel should appear all at once. So I guess I don't see why that should be a symmetry breaker. And I know you raise your own objections to it, but I'm curious what you think about that.
Yeah, that's a really interesting argument. So the premise of the argument is, I think, one that people who think that a Hilbert's Hotel is impossible would probably want to deny. The premise is that if there's an endless series of future praises or whatever, then it would be possible. Then an omnipotent being should be able to create one hotel room for each of those all at once. Have I got the?
Yeah. I guess, and you do specify in the paper, you talk, the idea of God just creating it all at once, and obviously they do want to reject the possibility of that. But in my mind, specifying that function makes it a little bit more concrete, like why, at least to me, this seems like it should be possible for an omnipotent being, in much the same way as that's basically what's happening with the past function, right? For each moment that passes, God adds a room. So I just don't see why that exact same function couldn't be done synchronically rather than diachronically.
Well, one person's modus ponens is another's modus tollens. You know that saying, if people, right? So your opponent here is going to say, I know that a Hilbert's Hotel is just crazy impossible. So I know that your premise must be false. And you're going to say, but God is omnipotent, and it just seems to me that omnipotence, requires that God be able to do this. And the reply is going to be, well, an omnipotent being can only do things that are metaphysically possible, right? And the thing you're asking God to be able to do is not metaphysically possible. That's
What I wonder though,
right now you're talking to a person who doesn't believe that a Hilbert's Hotel is anything more than weird. I mean, it might be physically impossible. It is physically impossible, I dare say. You couldn't have one on planet Earth, that's for sure. But the claim that it's metaphysically impossible is not one that I myself endorse. In the paper, we just said, well, suppose for the sake of argument that is so, right? Then you might produce this symmetry breaker. Are you with?
Rather than saying that God should be able to do it, something that's metaphysically impossible. I mean, the conclusion that's used is that it rules out the infinite past, right? Because that's impossible. So if this argument were to show that if there were an infinite future, then God should be able to do it, then I guess you could rule out the infinite future just as we ruled out the infinite past.
I think I might be able to take a stab at how Dr. Craig would respond to that objection. Is he adopts what's called the relational view of time, which he takes what time is the earlier than and later than relationships between states of affairs, and so essentially what it means for time to pass is for states of affairs to come and go, and you have new states of affairs, and so with that said, the function that you're describing would create a new state of affairs each time a room is created, because I take it that you want the function to be creating these rooms sequentially. And so in that case, each room would be a new state of affairs. And so if the function is to run through and create an infinite number of rooms, then an infinite amount of time would have to pass in order to reach the end of the function, or to reach an infinite amount in the function. And since, as Dr. Craig takes it to be the case that an infinite amount of time can't pass, then the function would just never complete. It would never. It would continue running and continue making rooms, and time would be going faster and faster and faster, depending on how fast this function's running. But it would actually never result in an infinite number of rooms having been completed.
Yeah, the idea was that it was going to be synchronic, all happening at once, just according to that function. But I think if we keep running on this, we might get sidetracked. Maybe we can talk about that another day. So I'll just pass the buck on to someone else at this point.
Okay. Yeah, I'll just say then that if it is synchronic, then describing it by function, I don't think necessarily makes it very different from just saying create it all in one go. In which case, I think the objection would be that because you're essentially saying let there be a Hilbert's Hotel, because there is no possible thing, there's no possible world in which a Hilbert's Hotel exists, then the command itself would have no referent. There would be nothing for it to refer to, and so it couldn't have an effect because the object is absurd and impossible, and therefore wouldn't be something that God could actualize, because there's no possible world that would be in order for him to actualize, if that makes sense. At least that's how I suspect he would respond. Obviously, I'm not Dr. Craig, but that's how I suspect.
Thank you.
He would respond. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. If anybody else has questions, you can go ahead and click that button at the bottom. So, Dr. Morriston, one of the things I would ask is, what about those who say, well, the number of praises in the future is actually infinite in the sense that that's truly the number, but it's not an actual infinite, because none of those praises are actual. Only the present is actual, and so since none of those future praises are actual, they wouldn't count towards an actual infinity. Much like the quantity of imaginary numbers is also infinite, but it's not an actual infinity because it's just a mathematical concept. None of those imaginary numbers are actual. So in the same way that the future praises wouldn't be actual, would that be, do you think it'd be a reasonable response in denying actuality to the future, or denying that the future counts as an actual infinite?
Not if each of them will occur.
Well, it isn't.
Each of them is that it will occur,
Mm-hmm.
then the number of events, each of which will occur, is not a merely potential infinite, it's an actual infinite.
Well, the number's actually infinity, right? But if we're taking the position that future events aren't actual, then they will be actual, but they're not now actual. I guess would be the
Would that be okay? But then what you're doing is just adding this term actual um, to your definition of the actual infinite. Am I right?
yes, that's right.
Okay. Well, suppose you do that, and I say, well, I withdraw the claim that it's an actual infinite. I say that it's countably infinite.
Okay. Well, yeah, and then I guess the response would be, well, I'm not sure how it being countably infinite would be problematic then,
Well,
because like the
it's
number of
countably
natural numbers.
infinite. It's countably infinite in exactly the same sense as that in which the past is a beginningless series of past events is countably infinite.
Yeah, yeah,
So,
no, I actually agree with that. And in fact, in reading your paper, because regardless of what we want to say about the infinite past, Christians who believe in eternal life, such as myself, we have a serious problem on our hands. Even if the past is finite, we believe the future is infinite, and so um, we have a serious problem on our hands if we allowed actuality to the future. Um, but yeah, I do think
yeah,
that.
but
Go ahead.
yeah, but many Christians believe that the future is determinate. I didn't say determined. I said determinate. That there is a complete body of fact about what will happen.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah, God certainly knows the future, including all,
I
future
mean,
tense.
there are open theists, open futurists
Hmm.
who are also theists who deny that. But that's not the usual view. The usual view is that there's a complete body of fact about the future, and God knows all of it.
Correct. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and
So,
I do recognize
so
that.
in
Go ahead.
so in my fanciful example, Gabriel saying maybe it's not so fanciful, saying one praise per year, one praise per celestial minute, or whatever, forever. It would be the case then that for each natural number n, there is a future praise that will be said by Gabriel.
Sure. Yeah.
Now,
Yeah. The
how many
Christian.
of there will not be any time in the future at which he will have said infinitely many praises. But right now, we can say that each of infinitely many praises will be said,
Yeah,
right?
I do think the objection is effective in sort of backing the proponent of the Kalam into the corner of denying actuality to the future, which then would have to also impact the past, and so you'd end up not having an actual future. But then you have to deny that the past would count as if the future can't count as an infinity, then certainly the past wouldn't count if it's because it's no longer actual. Um, and so
Um, Bill Craig's view, he says a couple of different things. One is that only the present exists. Um, and so the number of future events is really zero if we insist on my way of thinking about it. Um, that doesn't seem to me to help him at all because he should then say that the number of past events is also zero. And he certainly doesn't want to say that. He wants to say that a finite number of events have occurred. And if the past had no beginning, then the number would be countably infinite, right? Um, so he needs a symmetry, what we called a symmetry breaker in the paper. He needs to say why those two things are different. Um, so one way he pursues is to say, well, the past is part of the actual world. It's part of what, but this really just means the part of the past is part of what has happened. Okay, so you can define the actual infinite in such a way that the future doesn't count as an endless series of future events doesn't count as an actual infinite. But as long as they're in, you can enumerate them, then it's still a countable infinity. And whatever problems you claim to find with a countable infinity of past events, you're going to find with a countable infinity of future events too. So, would you mind if I just pursued that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah. I guess what I was saying was I think that the proponent of the Kalam is forced to agree with you. As I read the paper, I think that rather than say that both are actually infinite, I think we have to. It has to be one or the other, right? And so I think that the Christian would have to deny the actuality of the future, but then that goes for the past as well, and so that the number of future and past events are zero, and therefore the past then wouldn't be an actual infinite. So I do think that the paper, at least as far as I can tell, the paper does kind of, at least without some more work, you have to see what Dr. Craig would say about it, but I do think it defeats that objection.
Well, you sure don't want to say that they're both zero. Nobody really wants to say that.
Well, they're both zero in the sense that they're non-actual, right? Because on presentism, the past is no longer actual.
I got you. There are zero actual events, to which I say, well, so what?
Right.
Then, the whole idea was supposed to be that an actual infinite leads to contradictions, and that the past is a beginningless past would be an actual infinite. So if a beginningless past wouldn't be an actual infinite because the number is really zero, all of those arguments go out the window immediately.
Yeah. As far as I can tell, I think they might. But I got a question here from Hats Off. Let me go ahead and send him an invite, and we'll see what he's got to say. I got an invite out to you, Hat. All right, Hats Off. How you doing?
Thank you very much, Dr. Morrison, for your presentation. That's awesome. It sounds like it sounds like your gripe might not be with what's actual or not. It sounds like one of those things where you think that Craig is trying to prove too much. It's that so when I read Craig, and when he concludes that there are contradictions in an actual infinite, there's nothing in his reasoning about the actualness of it. I suppose, unless you count the the colorful illustrations that he gives. So it sounds like what you want to say is that nuts to whatever is actual or not. If there's a countable infinite, then it suffers from the same fate that Craig wants to assign to the actual infinite. And I don't know, maybe the idea of past versus future is just kind of playing into his game. But do you think that so when he concludes, for instance, and I know you talk about the infinity minus infinity in your paper, when he says stuff like that, do you think that he's trying to prove too much? And is this just kind of an illustration of that? Or is this something novel? I guess, I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure. I guess what Malpass and I wanted to say was that the arguments that are used against the quote unquote actual infinite are really just arguments against countable infinity, right? So there couldn't, the argument for saying that a beginningless series of past events is impossible is that, well, it would be countably infinite, and then there would be just as many, events prior to yesterday as there are today, right? As there were. You see what I'm saying? It's that feature of the actual infinite, or of countable infinity, that a part has the same right number of elements as the whole. That feature is the one that Craig finds so problematic. That's the feature that makes him say that there couldn't be an actual infinite. But that feature is possessed equally by an endless future and a beginningless past. That's what I want to say. So what I'm inclined to say is, well, that feature can't be that bad, since an endless future is clearly possible. Whether or not you believe it, it's clearly possible. So that feature can't be that bad, right? So you can't use it to show that a beginningless past is impossible. I hope that's clear.
It's very clear. I guess what I was asking is, but that's not the reason that you rejected the argument, right? Like, you find it persuasive in the first place, and you're using this as an example. Is that not so? Or maybe I've misunderstood it.
Well, it's I guess I'd put it this way. If you really like these arguments against the actual infinite, then you ought to like them when they're applied to an endless future. And that ought to make you think twice about whether those arguments are really good arguments. Does that make sense? Now, I could talk about what those arguments are, and why I don't think they're good arguments, just in their own terms, right? But what I am saying is, even if you did think they were good arguments, then you really ought to think that the future is finite.
Yeah, I know that does answer my question. And yeah, I agree with you. And yeah, again, thank you so much for coming on here and talking about this. It's been great.
All right, thanks, Hats. So when moving on, kind of like to the second part of the paper, you kind of played a response from Craig, something like, "Oh, okay, well, setting aside whether the infinite future or the infinite past is in itself an actually infinite, the past would make possible an actually infinite in the way that the future wouldn't, if God, for example, were to create a room every whatever interval of time." Then over an infinite past, we would have an infinite number of rooms, and that would result in Hilbert's Hotel, or an actually infinite collection in a way that wouldn't be the case for the future. What are your? I know you mentioned it in the paper, obviously, but if you could just review like what your objections are to that response.
Oh, sure. I think we may have made this too complicated in the paper. Here's the thought. Suppose, for the sake of argument, that a Hilbert's Hotel is just as impossible as people say, right? No possible world contains a hotel, an infinite hotel. Even God couldn't create one. Suppose, for the sake of argument, that we accept that. Now imagine that the past has no beginning. Well, at every year or every day or every divide the past up into units, whatever units you like. Is that God at every past day created a permanent hotel room, right? One that will not go out of existence, right? So he created hotel number 1 a day ago. He created hotel room number 2 a day before that, and so on, right? Well, the thought is that if past has no beginning, then that should be possible, right? And if it were possible, then a Hilbert's Hotel would be possible right now. We could have, right? Because all of those rooms would still exist. Are we clear what the objection is?
Yeah.
That Malpass and I need to respond to?
Yep. Yeah. So what's the problem with that objection?
Okay. Well, I think the answer is, well, yeah, God could have created such a hotel room at any time in the past, but it doesn't follow that he could have done so at all times in the past. And if you really do think that a Hilbert's Hotel is absolutely impossible, that is, an infinite collection of coexistent objects is absolutely impossible. If you really do think that, then then you shouldn't say that God could do this thing at all of the past day. Unit what I don't know what unit of time to take for a beginning past, but you know say, you should think again about saying that God could have done that at all of them. The fact that he could have done each of them as such that he could have done it, from that it doesn't follow that he could have done all of them. So that's the first thing to say. And the second thing to say is that, hey, on the hypothesis of the beginningless past and the hypothesis that God is creating these permanent hotel rooms throughout the whole of the past, right? On that hypothesis, then each time God creates a hotel room, he would be adding that room to a hotel that's already infinite. But you yourself say that an infinite hotel is absolutely impossible. So you shouldn't be saying that God could have been doing that, right? So if you really do think that a Hilbert's hotel is impossible, then I'm not sure that this argument is going to you can make this argument stick.
So, what if the respondent were to say, well, the reason why God can't create a Hilbert's hotel all in one go is because it's a metaphysically impossible object, and so it's logically prior to the command, let there be a Hilbert's hotel, that it's metaphysically impossible, that this is an absurd object.
Well, I would say adding one room to a hotel that's already infinite, where adding one hotel room to an impossible hotel is not a possible act for God, even for God.
Sure. Well, we would get to the notion. So you're raising kind of two objections. One is the theist, if he thinks the Hilbert's hotel is impossible, then he should, for some reason, say that God can't have been creating a hotel room every interval over an infinite past. That there must be something to prevent him doing that. And then the second objection was, well, if it is an actually infinite hotel, then it would have existed throughout the infinite past.
Yeah, I mean, on the objector's premises, when God creates those hotel rooms, he's adding them to an impossible object.
Right. Okay. So on the second one, I think what the critic would say is, well, that just illustrates more absurdity. Another reason for rejecting the infinite past is because God would always be completing an already complete hotel, and then that just shows just another absurdity that would result, and perhaps another reason to reject the infinite past.
Why would we think that God could do that then?
That God could create, could do what?
What the objector is saying, assume beginningless past, assume that God can create these at each moment or series of moments in the beginningless past. God can create a permanent hotel room that would still exist now, right? That's true. Then the objector jumps to the conclusion that God could have been doing this throughout the whole of that beginningless past. And my reply is, that doesn't follow. And if you really think that a Hilbert's hotel is impossible, you should say, well, God could create any finite number of these, but he couldn't have, any finite number of past stages could have been ones at which God created such hotel rooms. But it couldn't have been the case that throughout the whole of the beginningless past, God. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I feel as if I'm just repeating myself. Sorry.
Sure, no, you're fine. So I guess what I'm saying is, what if it seems like the objector is saying, well, you have to. It seems like you're insisting that the critic, we'll call him the theist. It seems like you're saying that the theist, in light of that objection, he must either give up, that he must be forced to say God couldn't have created a hotel over each interval. But why not instead say, well, it's an absurd result because there's an absurd presupposition, namely an infinite past. So why not give up the infinite past rather than give up God's ability to make a room at each interval over the
Oh, I
entire
see.
past?
Well, this then is a question about burden of proof. I mean, one alternative is to give up the infinite past. Another alternative is to give up the conditional claim that, you know, that if the past were beginningless, then God could have done this at every every minute throughout the whole of the past.
Okay. So then the
So,
the the theist is saying, okay, well, we've got these two options, and me as the theist, I'm presenting the column. I have the burden of proof to show which one of them we should prefer. Either we should either ditch the infinite past, or we should ditch God's power to make rooms, I suppose. And what if the theist were to say, but if we ditch the infinite past, that gives us a reason why God can't create the hotel that's explanatorily prior to his creating any rooms. Whereas if we ditch his hotel making, essentially what we're saying is he can't do it because of what it would result in. In other words, the issue that prevents him from creating it is explanatory posterior to his creating rooms. And so that would be a reason to prefer ditching the infinite past, is because it gives us a reason that's explanatorily prior to his constructing rooms.
that sounds interesting, but I'd like you to go through it again.
Sure. So it seems like the theist is put to a point where he has to, the way we've constructed this, he has to either give up an infinite past, or he has to give up God's hotel making prowess. We'll say. And so and he has the burden of proof, and he says, look, I'm presenting the kalam. I have the burden of proof to give some reason why we should give up the infinite past rather than God's hotel making abilities. And suppose that he gives as a reason to prefer ditching the infinite past, that if we give up the infinite past as the reason why this would be impossible, then we have a reason that's explanatorily prior to his creating hotel rooms as to why there won't be this Hilbert's hotel. Namely, he can't have created the hotel rooms over an infinite past because there is no infinite past over which he could have created these rooms. Whereas if we go with the other option, his hotel making prowess, we're having to say he can't have created these hotels because they would result in Hilbert's hotel, and that is the reason why he can't be making the hotels is explanatorily posterior to his hotel making, and so in as much as we should prefer the explanation be prior to his creating rooms, then we should go with the ditching the infinite past, since that gives us a better explanatory flow. Otherwise, you got this sort of weird backwards explanation where the result explains why the cause is impossible.
Um, yeah, I think I see what you're saying. Um, what do I think about that?
Okay. Well, let me give you a minute on that. I've got another question from Hats Off. If you don't mind, maybe we can circle back to that later, and I'll give him. I've been making him wait a while, so I feel bad about that.
Oh,
Is that okay?
okay.
All right. Hats Off. How you doing?
Yeah, far be it from me to speak for Dr. Morrison, but what I think he was saying is that, what you, Matt, were saying is, well, yeah, each step is supposed to be possible. And I think what they said in their paper is that each step is actually not possible, because at each step, the hotel is already infinite, right? And so God isn't like slowly building towards an infinite hotel. He's tacking on another room to an already infinite hotel. That very step is, according to the, uh, how does Craig say, the mutakelum, or whatever the Kellam apologist term he has, according to the Kellam apologist, that's supposed to be impossible, right? You can't start and add on another room, and so the very steps are supposed to be impossible. So you can't build towards it. I think that's what they were saying in their paper. Is that not the case, Dr. Morrison?
That is exactly right.
Well, that would be the second objection, right? Because there were kind of two objections here. One was,
Well,
if you think if you think it's metaphysically impossible to do it all at one go, then you should think it's metaphysically impossible that God should have been doing it. And then the second objection was, and if he were doing it, then the hotel would have to have already existed. So my response
well,
is more to the first objection.
um, there are two distinct points, but I think they're both correct. One is, as far as hotel room making prowess is concerned, nobody's denying that an omnipotent being would be able to create a permanent hotel room at any given time, or even that an omnipotent being could create a finite, there could be finitely many times at which an omnipotent being does this. But it doesn't follow, this is the first point, it doesn't follow that God could have done that at every past time, assuming that the time has no beginning, at every past minute or whatever, assuming that the past has no beginning. That just doesn't follow. So whatever if God's hotel making prowess doesn't extend to creating an infinite hotel all at once, then neither does it extend to his creating an infinite hotel sequentially. I mean, that's the first point. The second point is that suppose per impossibile that God created a hotel room at each past minute, where the number of past minutes is infinite, then at each of those moments, God would be adding a hotel room to a hotel that is already infinite. Now, you, objector, have said that that's impossible, that there are no infinite hotels. So, each of these acts that you're describing is impossible. I don't see why somebody who thinks that God can't create an infinite hotel would have a problem with what I'm saying. I don't see why they should have a problem with this.
Yeah, so on that first point, like I said, my response would be that we have to either jettison the infinite past or God's hotel making prowess. And jettisoning the infinite past rather than the hotel making prowess gives us an explanation that's explanatorily prior to the creation of the rooms, whereas jettisoning the hotel making prowess it forces the explanation to be explanatorily posterior to his making rooms. And then to the second issue of it being of him having to have always added to an infinite hotel that was already there, the response there, I guess, would be, well, that's just pointing out another absurd result of an actually infinite hotel. It's another reason why we should think that the hotel is impossible. That doesn't give us a reason to think that God creating hotel rooms over an infinite number of intervals wouldn't result in an infinite number of hotel rooms. It just shows us that per impossibile, this hotel really is absurd and impossible, because he would always be adding to an already infinite hotel, which is just another absurd result and yet another reason to reject one of the premises, either that there's an infinite past or that God could have created the hotel over each interval throughout the past. And again, I would just fall back to that original objection or that original rebuttal, I suppose, that ditching the infinite past gives us that explanatory priority as opposed to a posterior explanation.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add. I think that the gentleman who spoke a moment ago put my second point with crystal clarity.
Is it okay?
Yeah.
Is it okay? Yeah. So Matt, Dr. Morriston isn't making an argument against the infinitude of the hotel. What he's responding to in I forget if it's the fourth or fifth or whatever section of the paper, is Andrew Loke's argument that, okay, so let's say that an actual infinite is impossible, excuse me. So now the idea is to kind of leverage that to make sure that an infinite past is impossible. And Loke's argument is, okay, so supposing that an actual infinite is possible, granting that, now let's explore the infinite past. And so, okay, so in an infinite past, you could make rooms and rooms and rooms, and then you would end up with an infinite hotel. And Dr. Morrison's argument, which I think is valid and correct, is that, well, no, because, on an infinite past, you always have that infinite hotel.
Right, and that response is explanatorily posterior to his creation of rooms, right? Because we're saying he can't have done it throughout the infinite past because the result of such a thing would be an always being built but always already built hotel. And so we have a result that would be absurd, and which I get that you may not really want to concede that it's absurd, but for the purposes of our discussion and for the purposes of the paper, we're conceding that the hotel really is impossible. And so we're saying the result is this absurd scenario of God always creating, always creating an already created hotel, or always building an already built hotel. And so that just gives us another explanation that's posterior to his creating the rooms. Whereas saying he couldn't have created the hotel over an infinite number of intervals because there aren't an infinite number of intervals for him to have created it, that gives us an explanation that's explanatorily prior to his creating rooms. And so I guess both responses end up with an explanation that's posterior to his creating rooms. And in as much as a reason why you can't do something should be prior to you doing it, we should prefer to get rid of the infinite past rather than get rid of his ability to make these rooms.
Are we clear that our response to Locke's argument doesn't in any way suggest that there is any particular time or sequence of times, finite sequence of times, at which God couldn't create these permanent hotel rooms?
Right.
We that?
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. Well, we're pushing on an hour here. I do have another. Hats off. Did you have any other comments before I go to Joel? Had somewhat of an unrelated question.
Yeah, no, I don't. I'm surprised you left me on this long.
Okay.
Please take it away.
No, you're good. Thanks. Okay. Well, if it's all right with you, Dr. Morrison, I have I know you may not have. Obviously, I don't even know what he's going to ask. Hopefully, it's something PC. But I've got an unrelated question from Joel, if that's all right.
All right.
All right, Joel, I sent you an invite. What's on your mind, Joel? All right, I don't hear you. If do you hear him, Dr. Morrison? Maybe it's my audio again.
No.
Okay.
It's because it's unrelated.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, and he's gone now. All right. There he's back. Let's try bringing him back in. All right, Joel, are you there?
Am I audible?
Oh, yes, we can hear you now.
Yeah, so I had somewhat of an unrelated question. It was so in various papers, Dr. Morrison, you contend that given divine command theory, if God were to command something which were obviously evil, we would then have a moral obligation to do it. However, why would a theist who maintains divine command theory affirm this counterfactual? Given their commitments, the antecedent of the conditional is metaphysically impossible. Right now, an obvious response would be to say that various other counterfactuals containing metaphysical impossibilities could still very much be true. So, like, for example, if God didn't exist, the world wouldn't exist. So, while a theist would never think of such a state of affairs could be actualized, they can maintain that the proposition, though impossible, is true. However, in the divine command theory case, that proposition is not even true according to the divine command theorists lights. So how then can you maintain that the proponent of divine command theory is in any serious trouble? And just as a quick follow-up, um, would you think that this would prove too much because it could be applied to other normative ethical theories, so like virtue ethics? If a a virtuous person or a perfectly virtuous person could command something or would do something that's obviously evil, then we'd be like obligated to do it, or like Kantianism, right? So like if categorical reason required that we do something evil, we'd be like, you get the point, utilitarianism. Do you think this could go to all of those? So those would be my two questions.
Yeah. Yeah. My current view, which has been my view for quite some time, is that if a an omniscient and morally perfect being commanded you to do something, then it would be something you should do. That is my current view. Now, it may be that it would be impossible for God to command certain things because he's morally perfect. But if per impossibile, God did command those things, this is what you're asking about, I think, then sure, you should do it. If. So I think maybe I don't back quite the objection to divine command theory that you're imagining that I do. I did at one time think that was right, but I don't think that I gave. He's gone.
Yeah, no, I just put him back in the audience so you could finish your response, and then we'll move on since it is
okay.
unrelated.
I think I did at one time give this kind of argument at a conference in San Antonio. The kind of argument that the speaker is referencing, and subsequently, Alexander Pruss published a paper in Faith and Philosophy in which he made the kind of point that the previous speaker was making, and I thought that was quite a good point that Pruss made. Anyway, in my published work since then, I haven't made that objection. I mean, I don't find divine command theory to be a very plausible theory, but I haven't made that objection.
Okay. Well, did you have any final comments on the paper? And then also, if somebody is new to your work, is there a particular book or how would they get started if they wanted to read through your published work? Where would they get started there?
Oh, just Google Wes Morriston, and don't leave the T out of my last name.
Okay.
And you'll find, I have a whole bunch of papers on various topics: divine command theory, free will defense, lots of papers on the Kalam argument that are on the University of Colorado website. And if you get on there, a lot of them are freely available.
All right, sounds good. Well, I did tell you it'd be an hour, so we're right up at an hour. But thank you so much for coming on, Dr. Morrison. I really appreciate your time and the paper. It certainly did impact my thinking, and it did cause me to back away from some of the reasons I gave for supporting the Kalam, and so it's definitely been helpful in shaping my thinking in that way. I hope it has for others as well. But thank you so much for coming on.
Oh, thank you for the invitation. It was a pleasure talking to you.